There are only a few things in this world that will make a grown man sprint barefoot across gravel in nothing but pajama shorts with a toothbrush still foaming in his mouth. One of them is watching a tow truck drag away the vintage trailer he spent 2 years rebuilding by hand. That was me at 6:22 a.m. last Saturday, trying to shout through toothpaste and rage as my pride and joy, a fully restored 1978 Airstream, was being yanked off my driveway while the smug HOA president Karen Leeward filmed it on her phone like she was capturing the birth of a royal scandal. She actually had the nerve to say, "Smile for the camera, trailer trash." I nearly swallowed my toothbrush. I didn't even get a notice, not a letter, not a phone call, nothing, just one bright orange sticker slapped on the trailer's side sometime after midnight that read "Unauthorized vehicle subject to immediate tow." I was still blinking sleep from my eyes when the driver waved an invoice at me, $800 for towing an overnight impound. The man even looked apologetic. "But rules are rules," he muttered as Karen blew him a kiss from the curb. Then she turned and walked away like a villain at the end of a bad soap opera, leaving me with a driveway full of tire tracks and fury. I could have yelled, I could have stormed the next HOA meeting and made a scene, I could have called every lawyer in the county, but I didn't. I just stood there, toothbrush in one hand, phone in the other, and started dialing a very specific number I hadn't used in years. It rang twice before a gruff voice answered. "Yo, Lucas, that you better not be in jail." I smiled, wiped my mouth, and said, "I need 15 porta-potties by Monday morning. Think you can make that happen?" There was a pause followed by a laugh. Then the voice said, "For you, buddy, I'll throw in air fresheners." I went inside and pulled out an old blueprint tube from under the stairs. Inside were designs I'd made for concert layouts, music festivals, disaster relief sites. I used to design infrastructure for pop-up events, everything from water lines to waste management. My contacts were still solid and my credentials still active. Best part, one knew the legal limits better than most city inspectors, and I knew how to pull permits fast if you had the right lingo and a clean track record, which I did. I wasn't just mad, I was motivated. See, that trailer wasn't just some weekend project, it was my late brother's dream, something we were going to fix up together before his deployment. He never made it home, so I finished it alone. Every bolt, every panel, every stitch in the cushions had a memory behind it. That trailer was more than metal, it was therapy, it was closure, it was sacred, and Karen Leeward had it dragged away like a piece of junk that made this personal. I spent the next few hours drafting the permit application under the name Event Prep LLC, a company I used to consult under. I described the event as a community sanitation readiness simulation complete with accessibility demonstrations and odor control tests. It sounded so official, even I would have believed it. I submitted it online with a diagram showing where the units would go, neatly arranged in rows on the community center lawn facing the HOA office. I marked everything down from buffer zones to non-invasive installation methods. Everything was code compliant, nothing too aggressive, just inconvenient. By Sunday afternoon I received a city approval email and a permit number good for 1 week, no questions asked. The beauty of bureaucracy is that if you speak the right language, no one ever asks why, they just stamp and move on. I printed it, laminated it, and stuck it in a folder labeled Operation Flush. Sunday evening I walked past the HOA clubhouse on my way to drop off a package at the mailbox. Karen was inside sipping white wine through a straw and laughing with 2 other board members. I heard her say something about scrubbing the neighborhood of eyesores before the big property inspection next month. They didn't see me, I didn't wave, but I smiled wider than I had in months. That night I sat at my kitchen table and drafted a schedule. A single unit would arrive Monday at 9 a.m., 3 more by Tuesday, 10 by Wednesday, all legal, all clean, all brightly branded with HOA relief zone signs and slogans like "Flush Your Stress Away" and "Community Comfort Station." They wouldn't know what hit them, and the best part, one wasn't even breaking the rules, I was just applying them a little more creatively than they expected. My neighbor Tom swung by while I was painting a wood sign for the first unit. He looked at the blueprint, then at me, then back again. "You're putting toilets on their lawn?" I nodded calmly. "Sanitation awareness is very important, Tom." He chuckled, shook his head, and said, "I'll bring the popcorn." At exactly 8:57 a.m. Monday morning, the first blue porta-potty arrived on a flatbed. A young guy hopped out, checked the permit, scanned the lawn, and said, "You sure this is the right spot?" I pointed to the corner next to the flower bed. "Yep, right there, center stage." He shrugged, lowered the unit, and peeled out. Karen emerged 10 minutes later, still in her robe, coffee in hand, and let out a scream that startled a nearby pigeon. "What is this?" she demanded, marching up to the plastic fortress. I held up the laminated permit, official sanitation pilot project sanctioned by the city. She looked at it, blinked, tried to form a sentence, then stormed back inside, slamming the clubhouse door behind her. I stood there in the early morning sun, admiring my work. It was clean, respectable, and completely within my rights. The first volley had landed. Karen had taken the bait, and this was only the beginning of the most hygienically engineered revenge the HOA had ever seen. The next morning I was already outside sipping coffee when the delivery truck rolled in, carrying 3 more porta-potties stacked like blue plastic totems. The driver looked half amused, half confused, as he rolled down the window and asked, "You sure this is right, buddy?" I smiled, gestured to the large laminated copy of the city permit hanging from my mailbox, and said, "Positive, just line them up parallel to the sidewalk, but not blocking pedestrian access." He gave me a thumbs up and got to work, while I took a step back and admired the emerging fleet. They looked magnificent, like obedient little soldiers of sanitation standing guard over a battlefield that Karen Leeward thought she controlled. Neighbors started to notice. At first, just a few curious glances from behind curtains or while walking their dogs, but by mid-morning there were small clusters whispering and pointing. I heard snippets of conversation, things like, "Is that legal?" and "Did the HOA approve this?" and my personal favorite, "Is it some kind of art installation?" I said nothing. The best part about precision revenge is that the confusion does the heavy lifting. All I had to do was stand there calm and confident and let the paperwork do the talking. At 10:05 the clubhouse doors flew open and Karen burst out like a wasp from a kicked nest. She had traded her morning robe for a power suit in a shade of red that looked like it had been dyed in the fires of bureaucracy. Her heels clicked furiously across the pavement as she marched up to the nearest porta-potty and circled it like a vulture. "This is an eyesore," she snapped, turning to face me. "You've desecrated HOA property." I calmly handed her a copy of the permit and said, "The property is classified as communal use, and your own landscaping blueprints from last fall label this area as multipurpose demonstration lawn. That includes sanitation simulations. City approved," I added with a pointed smile. She looked at the document like it had personally insulted her family. Then she stormed off, phone in hand, probably dialing the city inspector or her lawyer or both. I watched her pace up and down the sidewalk, ranting into the phone, while the delivery guy finished placing the 4th unit. He raised his eyebrows at me and muttered, "This lady's gonna pop a vein before I drive off." I chuckled and replied, "Not if I give her enough places to relieve pressure." That afternoon I added the finishing touches. Small signs posted on each unit explaining its features: motion-sensing lights, hand sanitizer dispensers, eco-friendly waste tanks, and QR codes linking to a fake website I made called HOArelief.org. The site was mostly blank except for a few buzzwords about community sanitation education and a smiling cartoon toilet giving a thumbs up. By evening the porta-potties looked less like an intrusion and more like a curated exhibit. One neighbor even asked if it was part of a health initiative. Karen called for an emergency HOA board meeting that evening. I didn't attend, but I parked a lawn chair on the edge of my driveway with a soda and a pair of binoculars, watching the parade of furious members storm in and out of the clubhouse. I could hear raised voices even with the windows shut. At one point one of the newer board members marched out and kicked the base of one of the units in frustration. It didn't budge. They were anchored with temporary stabilizers just in case. Late that night I walked by the clubhouse just to check for vandalism. I didn't put it past Karen or one of her allies to try something stupid. Sure enough, I found a half-used roll of duct tape and a pile of zip ties next to the furthest unit. Someone had tried to wrap it shut and failed. My cameras caught it all. I had installed 2 discrete motion-activated trail cams earlier that day aimed right at the lawn. I pulled the footage onto a flash drive and labeled it insurance. The next morning the news vans arrived. I hadn't contacted them directly, but someone clearly had. Maybe a neighbor, maybe one of the board members looking to shame me publicly. Either way, I welcomed the attention. The anchor stepped out of the van and laughed when he saw the line of porta-potties. He walked up to me and asked, "What exactly is happening here, sir?" I pulled out the permit, handed it to him, and said, "Civic sanitation awareness demonstration, perfectly legal and open to the public." He blinked at me, then at the row of toilets, then back again, and said, "Well, that's a first." I told him the HOA recently expressed concerns about community preparedness, and I wanted to help. He didn't buy it for a second, but he smiled and said, "Well, it's going to be a fun segment either way." Karen appeared moments later like a cartoon villain late to a heist gone wrong. She tried to shove her way into the interview, shouting about violations and sabotage and neighborhood values, but the reporter held up the permit, shrugged, and said he couldn't argue with city approval. That only made her angrier. She accused me of manipulating the system, weaponizing legality, and dishonoring HOA principles. I just said, "Thank you, I try my best." By noon the story was trending on local social media. People posted selfies with the porta-potties tagged with hashtag #FlushTheHOA and hashtag Karen needs a break. A local artist painted a mural on one of the units of a toilet throne with a crown labeled Queen Karen of Flushington. I left it up. It was hilarious. In the midst of the chaos, I received an email from the city inspector asking if everything was proceeding as scheduled. I replied yes and thanked them for their swift permit processing. I included a short video of the crowd gathered in front of the units discussing sanitation awareness. They replied with a thumbs-up emoji and no further questions. Karen tried to escalate. She sent a cease and desist letter through the HOA lawyer, but it had no legal ground. My permit was rock solid and the site usage compliant. When she threatened to tow the units, I pointed out that any unauthorized removal would be considered destruction of city-sanctioned equipment, a misdemeanor under local code. That shut her down fast. By the end of the second day, there were memes, entire Reddit threads, even a small TikTok dance filmed in front of the unit. My plan wasn't just working, it was exploding. And the best part, one hadn't even deployed the full fleet yet. That was coming tomorrow. 10 more units arriving at dawn, each one with a custom decal and a ridiculous new slogan like Rest Stop of Justice and Throne Zone HOA Edition. Karen's nightmare was just beginning. And I was only flushing the surface. By the time Wednesday morning rolled around, the HOA lawn no longer resembled a piece of real estate. It looked like a festival ground minus the music and fun, and heavy on the bright blue plastic fortresses that now numbered 14. The 10th porta-potty had been lowered into position before sunrise, and the delivery crew, clearly in on the joke by now, started arranging them with unnecessary but hilarious symmetry, like decorative pillars outside a throne room. Each one had a different decal slapped on the side, from cartoon kings sitting on toilets to protest slogans about HOA tyranny disguised as sanitation messages. By mid-morning, locals had started referring to the spot as Potty Plaza. Karen was unraveling in real time. She had made 4 failed calls to the city trying to rescind the permit, but since I had followed every legal process to the letter, there was nothing anyone could do. The only person more furious than Karen was Mr. Bellamy, the HOA treasurer, who was now getting non-stop complaints from members asking why their dues were being used to stage a potty-themed circus. He marched across the lawn with a printout of my permit, waving it like a flag of surrender, and muttered under his breath that they should have just left my trailer alone in the first place. I almost offered him a chair, but I figured he'd sit better after the full meltdown. Things took an unexpected turn when the sanitation company I had hired sent over a customer satisfaction team to inspect the units and hand out coupons for free deodorizer spray. I hadn't asked for this. Apparently, my little stunt had attracted corporate attention. A manager in a pressed shirt and a wide grin walked up to Karen and offered her a customer loyalty card. She screamed so loud a crow flew out of the nearest tree. The crew handed me a thank you card and asked if they could use the site photos for their next marketing campaign. I agreed on one condition, that they include a caption crediting the HOA for their commitment to community hygiene. They loved the idea, but not everyone was thrilled. A few of the more conservative residents held a small protest near the clubhouse steps, holding signs that read "Take back our lawn and enough with the toilet." They were polite but frustrated, clearly unaware that their complaints should have been aimed at Karen, not me. I walked over, handed them laminated copies of the original trailer towing report and asked them to notice the date and violation number, or rather the lack of one. That's when one of the older women, Mrs. Delaney, asked quietly, "Wait, they never filed a formal warning before towing you?" I shook my head. "That's not just rude," she muttered, "that's illegal." Word started to spread. A few residents confronted the board, demanding to see the bylaws and authorizations for trailer towing. Karen tried to bluff, saying it was an emergency safety measure, but someone pointed out that the HOA newsletter from that month had featured a picture of Karen's own son using his friend's trailer for a backyard movie night. The hypocrisy was like gasoline on a barbecue. By lunch, I could hear shouting from inside the clubhouse. Someone slammed a door hard enough to make the windows rattle. Around 2 in the afternoon, Karen tried a desperate move. She walked over to the porta-potties with a roll of plastic caution tape and started wrapping them up like crime scenes. I watched from my lawn chair as she muttered about biohazards and moral decay, tangling herself in the tape more than once. I was halfway through a sandwich when my phone buzzed. The motion sensors I'd mounted on a tree earlier pinged, capturing Karen in full sabotage mode. She wasn't just taping the units. She was pulling off decals and trying to unscrew ventilation cap. That was all I needed. I forwarded the footage to both the sanitation company and the city inspector. They responded within the hour. A city compliance officer arrived just after 3 p.m. in a tan sedan, clipboard in hand. He didn't say much, just examined the units, checked the permit posted on site, and then asked Karen very calmly if she had removed any parts from a city-permitted sanitation fixture. Karen tried to lie, said she was just inspecting them for safety. But when the officer mentioned the footage, her face drained of color faster than a broken toilet tank. She was cited on the spot. Not just for tampering with certified equipment, but for potentially violating environmental disposal protocols. I didn't even know that was a real thing until he read it out loud. Karen stood there fuming as the officer handed her the pink copy of the violation report. Meanwhile, residents had started gathering, phones out, recording every second of the humiliation. Mr. Bellamy took the opportunity to walk over and announce that the board would be holding a vote of confidence regarding the president's position. That was HOA speak for "we're about to vote her out." But Karen, never one to go down quietly, marched up to my driveway like she still had cards to play. "You've made a mockery of this entire community," she hissed. "This isn't over." I calmly leaned back in my chair and said I hope not. I still have 6 more porta-potties scheduled for Friday. Her mouth opened and closed like she was short-circuiting, then she stormed back toward the clubhouse muttering threats that made no sense, something about homeland security and chemical warfare. As the sun began to set, kids rode their bikes past the units laughing and pointing. A few local high schoolers took prom photos next to them for the meme value. Someone even stuck a tiara on one of the units and wrote "Royal Flush" in gold glitter. By twilight, Potty Plaza had turned into a community landmark. Back inside, I sat down at my desk and began uploading the footage to a secure drive. The trail cam footage, the phone videos, even the news segment that had aired the night before. I was building a file labeled HOA Fallout. I had a feeling I'd need it soon. My inbox pinged. It was a message from a local attorney who specialized in HOA dispute. The subject line read "Class Action Potential." I didn't open it right away. I just stared at it for a moment, then closed the laptop with a grin. I knew Karen. She wouldn't give up. She'd come back harder and louder, probably try to leverage some technicality or call in a favor from someone at City Hall. But that was fine, because now I wasn't alone. The neighborhood had turned. The board was fracturing. And my trailer, the one they had towed like garbage, was suddenly looking a lot more like the spark that lit the fuse. The funniest part of all? I hadn't even touched a single HOA rule. I was playing entirely within their own system, and it was driving them insane. Tomorrow would bring a new wave of unit. Bigger ones. Some with mirrors. One with an interior sound system. And every one of them would come with a receipt stamped paid in full. I wasn't just proving a point. I was rewriting the blueprint of neighborhood resistance, one flush at a time. Friday morning arrived like a slow drumroll building toward an orchestral explosion. The sun hadn't fully risen yet, but I was already dressed and ready, coffee in hand, standing at the edge of my lawn as the rumble of diesel engines echoed down the street. The delivery trucks were right on time. Not one, not two, but 3 full-sized flatbeds, each stacked with oversized deluxe porta-potties painted in pastel blues, mint greens, and one even wrapped in faux marble vinyl. These weren't your average construction site cubicles. These were luxury mobile restrooms complete with solar-powered lighting, faux wood floors, touchless sinks, and Bluetooth speakers that played smooth jazz when you locked the door. It was absurd. It was glorious. The lead driver stepped down, looked over at the growing crowd of neighbors gathered on sidewalks with their phones out, and asked, "You're the guy?" I raised my cup and nodded. He laughed and said, "This is officially the weirdest job we've had all year." I just grinned and pointed to the lawn in front of the HOA office. "Set 'em up right there. Angle them toward the windows. I want maximum visibility." As the first unit was being craned down, I spotted Karen storming out of the clubhouse, a clipboard clutched in one hand and a half-eaten bagel in the other. She looked like she hadn't slept in 2 days. Her hair was pulled back in a messy bun that screamed desperation, and her expression was a cocktail of disbelief, fury, and the kind of panic reserved for people who just realized their plan backfired in public. She shouted, "This is harassment, you're targeting me." I didn't respond. The city permit was posted in 4 different spots by now, including one laminated to the side of each new unit. She stomped over, bagel forgotten somewhere on the pavement, and launched into another rant about public nuisance laws and zoning codes, but it was all noise at this point. Everyone had seen the videos. Everyone had heard her tantrums. Even her fellow board members were keeping their distance now, no longer shielding her with polite nods or silent complicity. Mr. Bellamy had been overheard at the grocery store saying he'd rather share a bathroom with a gorilla than sit through one more meeting chaired by Karen. Word traveled fast. As the final unit touched down, a small cheer erupted from the crowd. It wasn't loud, more like a ripple of amusement, but it was real. People weren't just entertained anymore. They were participating. A local bakery delivered a dozen cupcakes with tiny fondant toilets on top and a handwritten note that read "Thanks for the laugh." Even the delivery crew got in on the joke, taking selfies with the luxury loose before driving off. One of them winked at me and said, "If you ever run for mayor, you've got our vote." By noon, the HOA lawn looked like a scene from a bizarre art installation. 11 porta-potties lined up in 2 neat rows, each with a nameplate. The throne room, the porcelain palace, the silent stallion, and so on. I added small solar lanterns around them for ambience and placed potted plants at the entrances. A Bluetooth speaker played elevator music from a loop I had downloaded the night before. It was the most elegant bathroom blockade in suburban history. Karen made one final attempt to shut it all down. She called an emergency meeting and tried to present a motion that the units posed a health risk, but the city inspector arrived mid-meeting with a clipboard and informed the entire board that the sanitation units were not only compliant but had exceeded the city's cleanliness standards. He even complimented me on the setup, said he'd never seen public restrooms this well-maintained in his 20 years of inspections. Karen's jaw clenched so tightly I thought her teeth might fuse. That afternoon, I launched the final phase of the plan. I unveiled a new website, Flushmob, dedicated to satirical HOA reform and neighborhood pranks that stayed within the letter of the law. It had tips on navigating municipal codes, a gallery of the porta-potty installation, and a sign-up sheet for communities interested in staging their own polite rebellions. The tagline read, "Turning outrage into outdoor plumbing solutions." Within an hour, the site got picked up by a local satire blog, then a mid-size news station. By evening, a national podcast host had tweeted about it. The attention exploded faster than I expected. Back at home, I received an email from the sanitation company offering me a long-term consulting role for event layouts and marketing strategies. They even floated the idea of sponsoring a portable restroom innovation expo. I laughed so hard I nearly dropped my phone. All of this because Karen towed my trailer without cause. Speaking of the trailer, I hadn't forgotten it. While the HOA burned through their reputation, I quietly made arrangements to retrieve my Airstream. I had it towed back by a private hauler early that evening and parked it right on my driveway under a solar-powered spotlight. But this time, I added something extra. A professionally printed banner across the side that read Community Veteran Restoration Project with a logo I designed based on my brother's military insignia. I wasn't just making a point anymore, I was reclaiming space. And no one dared touch it. Karen came out just after sunset, probably drawn by the buzz of neighbors gathering to see the trailer's return. She stood at the edge of the lawn staring at the banner, her eyes bouncing between the trailer, the porta-potties, and the people laughing and chatting like they were at a neighborhood fair. Her empire had crumbled. Her authority was shattered. All she had left were muttered complaints and dwindling allies. The next morning, word got out that the HOA board would be voting on new leadership. Karen didn't even show up to the meeting. Mr. Bellamy was appointed interim president, and one of the first orders of business was to pass a motion preventing the board from unilaterally towing resident vehicles without proper documentation and warning. It passed unanimously. I watched it all happen from the back of the room, silent and satisfied. As the board closed the session, Mr. Bellamy glanced my way and nodded. I nodded back. No words exchanged. Just a quiet acknowledgement that the storm had passed and the landscape had shifted. Later that day, I began dismantling the porta-potties, one by one. Not because I had to, but because the message had been delivered and received. Neighbors came out to help. A few even offered to store one of the deluxe units in their backyard as a guest restroom. I declined politely. The point was never to clutter the neighborhood with toilet. The point was to show that when you push the wrong person too far, and that person knows the system better than you do, the consequences can be unexpected, unorthodox, and absolutely unforgettable. By sundown, only one unit remained, the first one, the Pioneer. I left it standing one more night as a monument, a quirky little trophy. Someone had placed a small LED candle inside and a post-it note on the door that read Justice Throne. I didn't know who did it, but I smiled. Because somewhere in this bizarre mess of permits, plastic, and petty politics, I'd managed to turn Karen's tyranny into a movement. And tomorrow I'd flush the last piece of it away. The final unit stood alone on the edge of the now-cleared lawn, its door gently creaking with each gust of wind like it too was ready to say goodbye. The rest had been hauled off earlier that morning with the help of volunteers who turned the whole thing into a kind of send-off celebration, bringing muffins and juice, and making jokes about what they'd name their firstborn porta-potty. There was laughter, group photos, even a neighbor who played acoustic guitar while people posed in front of the last unit as if it were the backdrop to a high school prom. No one could have predicted that a ridiculous revenge scheme would end up turning the HOA's central lawn into a local attraction, but that's exactly what had happened. It wasn't about the toilets anymore. It was about reclaiming a voice that Karen had silenced for years. People had been walking on eggshells, afraid of infractions, fines, and passive-aggressive newsletters with bolded words like violation and unacceptable. But now they were talking about community gardens, new board rules, maybe even starting a neighborhood barbecue that didn't require 7 forms of approval. The lawn had become a symbol, and in an odd way, so had the porta-potties. Tools of mockery, yes, but also a blueprint for how humor and legality could dismantle power when used the right way. I stood beside the final unit that afternoon, sipping an iced tea and watching the sun bounce off its plastic shell. It had graffiti now, but not the angry kind. Kids had drawn flowers and stars with chalk markers. Someone had written "Long Live the Flush" in cursive across the top, and another note read "Thank you, bathroom hero." It felt surreal. What started as personal vengeance had grown into collective transformation. I wasn't the only one who felt wronged by Karen. I was just the first to make her answer for it in a way she couldn't suppress. Inside the clubhouse, a very different scene was unfolding. Karen had returned that morning not with fire in her eyes, but with resignation on her face. She entered through the back and went straight to her office, collecting her things into a small cardboard box, pausing occasionally to glance out the window at the people laughing in the sun. Her reign, if you could call it that, had ended not with a confrontation but with exhaustion. She didn't fight the vote, didn't issue a final letter, didn't even demand a recount. She just left. There was no applause when she walked out. No jeers either. Just silence. People watched her pass, many unsure whether to feel sorry for her or relieved that she was finally gone. I didn't speak to her. I didn't need to. Everything I had to say had already been written across 24 blue plastic walls, captured in social media posts, and cemented in policy changes. Her exit was the punctuation mark on a sentence I had started the moment she had my trailer towed without notice. As the last truck arrived to haul away the final unit, I stepped forward and gave the driver a quick rundown of where to place it at the sanitation depot. He looked around at the now empty lawn and said, "Never thought I'd see people throw a going-away party for porta-potties." I laughed and said, "You'd be surprised what happens when a community realizes it has power." He nodded, strapped the unit down, and drove off, leaving tire marks and a few forgotten streamers behind. I turned back to my house, where my trailer now sat proudly on the driveway under a retractable canopy I had installed a few days ago. It gleamed in the light, polished and perfect, with fresh decals and a new sign beside it that read "Historic Restoration in Progress." It was more than just protection, it was declaration. Karen or no Karen, no one was going to treat it like an eyesore again. Not with the neighborhood on my side. Not with half the internet knowing the story. Inside, I sat down at my desk and began reviewing an email that had arrived earlier that day from a production company. They wanted to feature my story in a documentary series about grassroots activism and community defiance. I wasn't sure if I'd accept, but I had to admit, the idea of sharing what happened, not just for entertainment, but as a case study in how to beat systems with their own rules, had some appeal. I bookmarked it for later and moved on to the next message. It was from someone named Gina, a woman who lived in another HOA across the country and had been fined $500 for planting sunflowers in her own front yard. Her subject line read, "Help me flush my HOA." I chuckled and typed a quick reply, "Start with your bylaws and find your lawn." In the weeks that followed, change rippled through the neighborhood. Mr. Bellamy was confirmed as the new HOA president, but this time he served more as a facilitator than a dictator. Committees were formed, votes were open and accessible, and the tone of meetings shifted from defensive to cooperative. Someone even suggested turning part of the HOA lawn into a dog park. There was laughter. Honest, warm laughter. That hadn't happened in a long time. As for me, I kept things quiet. No more antics, no more installations. Just peace. I worked on the trailer on weekends, hosted a few neighbors for coffee, and occasionally answered emails from people inspired by the saga. Flush Mob had taken on a life of its own, gathering subscribers and contributors who shared their own ridiculous but effective stories. It became a kind of digital sanctuary for the petty but legal, a place where justice didn't need to be loud to be heard. Months later, on the anniversary of the trailer being towed, the neighborhood held a block party. No one called it that officially, it was just a barbecue in the cul-de-sac, but everyone knew. There was music, food, even a trivia contest where one of the questions was how many porta-potties did Lucas install. The winning team got custom mugs that read Throne Zone Champion. I gave a short toast. Nothing dramatic, just a thank you for standing together when it counted. They cheered. Someone popped a confetti cannon. It was ridiculous. And perfect. As the sun set, I sat on my porch and watched the kids run through sprinklers while the grown-ups sipped cold drinks and swapped stories. The trailer glowed under the last rays of daylight, a quiet monument to a battle fought with toilets instead of torches. And somewhere deep inside, I knew this wasn't just the end of a story. It was the beginning of a new kind of community, one built not on rules and punishments, but on memory, laughter, and the knowledge that even the most outrageous plan can bring people together, if it's executed with precision, purpose, and maybe just a little bit of potty humor.